Hi. I'm going to say hi a few times because I can hear myself on the mic, and it's weirding me out. So I'm going to say hi. Hi. Zach, is that too loud? Is that all right? It's okay with you? I'm going to talk quieter than I usually talk because on the mic I feel like I'll blow your ears out. I don't. So usually I talk really, really loud and really fast, but I will try not to do either. If I'm talking too fast, because I can get pretty psyched, raise your hand and tell me to slow down. That's totally fine. Another thing you might want to know is that this is my very first PowerPoint ever. My people don't do PowerPoint. So this is a great thing that I've learned from the Human Ecology core course. I'm super psyched about it. But again, it's sort of an experiment. So this is the first time I'm using this. I'm just letting you know. Okay, let's do this, yeah? Sweet. I have learned this fall that it is a really terrible idea to agree to be the last faculty lecturer in the Human Ecology core course. It's terrible for a lot of reasons, but partly because of my inherently, well, because I'm just afraid of inadequacy and everybody was really good and I'm last and it sucks. But mostly it also creates in me this irrepressible urge to wrap everything up for you guys, to just sort of put everything into a little neat, beautiful package and tie it up with a bow and make profound declarations, and that's totally not going to happen. I can't possibly do that. I feel like Jay kind of did that, but I'm not going to do that. So anyway, I will say one thing, though, about that instinct in me. I've been forcing my class to do it, my own section a little bit. We've been attempting on and off throughout the term without tying a bow to sort of piece together this big Human Ecology core course puzzle. And we spent a few occasions roughly listing on the board the basic points of each of the topics we've covered in this course and where we saw examples of crossover or connections. Our list included words like this. Look, it worked. These are the first words that we put on the board. I mean, they're sort of like that. I don't know if I covered all of them, but these were examples. History, perspective management, conservation, problems, solutions, ethics, education process, success. But the other day, our list sort of began to expand, which was sort of interesting. We began to add words that had even more personal meaning, words that attempted to define the emotional impact of each lecture that we'd seen and each of the collection of readings. Words for us that express the topics and speakers in a visceral way instead of just an intellectual way. So we came up with words like these. Vision, passion, love, restraint, hope, despair, values, curiosity, action. Today, I am going to attempt in this lecture to add something to the second pile. I'd like to add this word. I love this word. I'm going to talk today about empathy and generosity and courage, but it's really irreverence that I'm most attracted to here, so try to keep that in mind as we move forward. Besides being an instructor, as Bonnie said, I am an actor. I make theater, and this means that I work in collaboration with other people to define and translate relationships and ideas in a way that will move an audience. The primary goal is moving people to change. That is not to be confused with changing people's minds on a given topic or issue. I mean viscerally moving people, nurturing empathy, encouraging social and cultural evolution, inspiring epiphany. And I realize that sounds pretty highfalutin. It sounds like I'm talking about church, I know. But don't get me wrong, a lot of theater out there today completely fails in those pursuits, but so do a lot of churches. And so we all just keep trying because that's what we believe in, and it's what I believe in more than anything. In more practical terms, I guess I look at theater as civic practice, as public practice. And for me, it's about much more than just putting on plays. Today, I've chosen to focus my thoughts primarily on comedy as a cerebral and visceral processor, and comedy as a uniquely transformative tool for social change. I also wanted to talk about comedy because on some level, it's this thing that I think that we all understand, everybody. We all like to laugh because it makes us feel good, and feeling good is good. But comedy can also make us smarter, and it can make us better, and that's good too. That's really important. So I'm going to try to explain why and how I think comedy works today, but before I do that, I'm going to take a shortcut through tragedy, so stay with me for 1 second. You may have heard this before. Has anybody heard that before? It's pretty common, right? It's true. Actors love this. We say it all the time. We say it all the time because it's super dramatic to say all the time. But we say it because it's the most fundamental truth about theater. Plays don't happen without conflict. Scenes within plays don't happen without conflict. Beats within scenes within plays don't happen without conflict. Plays study human relationships and the human condition is ultimately defined by how we deal with conflict. Being a person is really hard. It's hard to live together with people. It's hard to live with a spouse. It's hard to live together on a college campus, let alone in the whole human race. It's hard to understand each other, hard to understand ourselves, and hard to reckon with those massive existential questions in the clanging recesses of our heads. Most of us want answers to those questions, and I would argue that most of us want to act. Most of us want to take action. We want to take noble and generous action to make this world a better place, despite all the obstacles with which we are faced, and we are faced with many obstacles, right? In order to face those obstacles, we need to practice. We need a place. We need a safe place to practice being people, to practice solving problems, a place to rehearse for those times when we will get lost, because as Nick Flynn told you in that essay that I made you read, we will all get lost at some time or another. And so for me, that's where theater comes in. A theater is a place where we can go, as I have said before, a literal location, oftentimes in a building, but not always, that if you go there, you are making a collective agreement with a crowd of people to spend some serious time together thinking about who we are. It's where we rehearse empathy. Now, that function was mapped out pretty clear by Aristotle, but in case you have not read your Aristotle, I'm going to give you a quick example. If I just told you about the play Oedipus, that a guy unknowingly kills his dad and sleeps with his mom and then rips out his eyes, you might say, that sucks for that guy. That's terrible. He should not have done that. Poor guy. But if you go to the play and you sit in a theater with actors right in front of you, you might sit there and say, wow, I should totally not kill my dad and sleep with my mom and rip out my eyes. That would suck for me, right? That would be terrible for me. So while you're watching this play unfold, you might also have time to consider much more. Like, what if I did kill my dad and sleep with my mom and rip out my eyes? How would I feel about that? If I killed my dad and slept with my mom, what would I do? Would I really rip out my own eyes, or would I do something else? Something worse. What's worse than ripping out your own eyes? I don't know. I can't think of anything. But it sounds silly, but it's actually a really, really good workout for both your head and your heart. Buster Keaton was a great silent film comedian. If you don't know Buster Keaton's work, you should check it out. One of the most amazing performers ever to live on the earth. And he provided that same kind of existential workout for his audiences. And he did it without words. Some comics can do it with a one-liner, I swear to God. Comedy is a spectacularly efficient empathy builder. And again, that's for me the whole point, that empathy thing. I'm often troubled when I hear people say that our capacity for empathy is limited. I have that conversation a lot around here, actually. It's an interesting conversation. Not that everybody says that to me, but anyway. I think it's interesting when people think that you could not possibly empathize with somebody from a culture far different from your own, or with somebody who's fought in battle, or somebody who's committed a heinous crime, or somebody who's lost a loved one, unless you've literally experienced those things for yourself. I say, of course you can. Try harder. Use your imagination, right? Our imaginations are very, very powerful. This is not to say that I can ever truly know the actual details, the facts of someone else's experiences. I can't. Even if they tell me or show me explicit photos, I can't ever know that. But for me, that's kind of different than empathy. Empathy is not about facts. It's about truth. Fat truth, right? Big truth. It's about making a conscious effort to look and listen harder than seems reasonable. It's about making a choice to be viscerally generous. It's saying, I will feel with you. And I don't think it's that much of a jump from I will feel with you to I will laugh with you. So, back to this conflict thing. That's true, but this is also true. Comedy fuels conflict. That's really all you need to know. That's what it does. It presents us with conflict, and it demands that we reckon with conflict in real time, some sort of conflict. The challenge of doing that exercises our brain in many ways, but it can also push us into territory we might not otherwise go to. Laughing, for whatever reason, seems to help make the hard work of human understanding a little easier to digest. It's like a digestive aid. So I'm going to take a minute to briefly synopsize a few theories about how and why comedy works. These are the basics of comic theory. There's tons more to talk about besides this, but these are like the basics. This is probably the most common terminology used when talking about theories of humor, and these three categories were probably, well, they were articulated best, I think, by a guy named D.H. Monroe in a book called The Argument of Laughter. Now, he didn't invent these categories, but he does talk about them in a sort of helpful way, and he pretty much says what I'm about to run through. The first one is superiority. Superiority, this should be familiar to all of us. It's based on the idea that we laugh at others' misfortune or stupidity. We laugh at those that we think are lesser than ourselves. Now, that sounds kind of nasty, and it can be, but if you really think about it, if you really think that you would never do that, I kind of think you're fooling yourself, because we all do that in some sort of way. It may not be a nasty way, but we do it. Some of us feel bad about doing it, and so sometimes we need a little bit of help. So sometimes comedians disguise themselves. They disguise themselves in all sorts of ways, sometimes like a circus clown with makeup and a funny nose. Charlie Chaplin wore those suits that didn't fit him quite right, that were very small and giant floppy shoes, and he had that little Hitler mustache. Comics do this to relieve our guilt. The costume makes them slightly less real, so we're free to care less about their emotional and their physical safety. But there's one important side note here. Occasionally, comedians will put on the costume of somebody that we, the big we, really do value less. A costume of someone that for whatever reason we already feel comfortable ridiculing in real life. And that's something important to consider. Who are those that we feel okay about laughing at right now? If you watch primetime television, you can probably figure that out, right? The second theory of humor is incongruity. And this means basically that we laugh at stuff that doesn't make sense. We laugh at ideas or visuals or stories that defy our expectations. We talked a little bit about that yesterday with the movie. We tend to rely heavily on previous knowledge and experience to predict future outcomes. And sometimes comedy intentionally shakes that up. It rattles common assumptions and uses the element of surprise or confusion to make us laugh. We laugh because something just isn't right about the situation, or the language, or the person themselves, or the reaction. The last category is relief. And this was a big one for Freud. The theory of relief. You guys heard about relief and Freud? Anybody? A couple people? The theory of relief in humor is basically that we have this constant inner censor that is telling us that we should, what we should and shouldn't do, what we should and shouldn't say, and what we should and shouldn't think. Some of that's based in cultural and social expectation, and some of that is based in logic and reason. In this category, you get totally inappropriate humor. You get sex jokes, and you get jokes about violence and aberrant behavior. Freud believed that our inner censors are so oppressive that we actually need a break from them in order to function properly. We need relief from those censors. And so even though those fourth grade jokes about excrement and genitalia are pretty stupid, it seems they have a pretty important function. I know this because my kid is in fourth grade. As grown-ups, maybe especially as grown-ups, allowing ourselves to laugh about really unspeakable things relieves us from the guilt we feel from thinking about them. And it helps us process that which might seem otherwise overwhelming. And then there's also the aspect of relief around illogicalness and the illogicalness of the world and illogical structures of language. Jokes that mess with those rules also provide relief. Puns do that. Sometimes riddles do that. Those are small but super efficient little morsels of comedic construction, and they work really well. They're meant to help exercise our brain and relieve us from our little inner dictator voice. So, to recap in language that I hope most of us understand, the comedy of the banana peel, I will tell you what I figured out. Superiority is when there is a banana peel on the sidewalk and I slip on it and you laugh, right? Incongruity is when there is a banana peel on the sidewalk and all passersby seem to narrowly but unknowingly avoid slipping on it until a dog stops to eat it and I trip over the dog and you laugh, right? Relief is when there's a banana peel on the sidewalk and two guys walk by and one guy slips on it and on his way down he grabs the other guy for support and he pulls down his pants and you laugh. There is a dirtier one than that, but I decided not to use that one. Of course, our minds are that was super simplistic. Our minds are much more complicated than that. So there are all these possibilities for hybrids, which I'm sure you are thinking of right now, right? My kid Harlan is 6. And when I was working on this talk, he was helping me, and he came up with this. You're walking down the street, and there's a banana peel hovering in midair. You stare at it for a minute, and then it beats the crap out of you. Isn't that awesome? That is so awesome. He's super advanced. So, yeah. He always kills, my kid. All right. This is a gift for Sean Todd. That is a penguin on the ice slipping on a banana peel. That's kind of funny. Yes? Yes? Okay. So, now I'm going to show you a few non-banana peel examples. We're going to get back to the sort of serious study for a second. All the examples I'm going to show you after this are taken from a New Yorker article that I saw last spring about neuroscience and comedy. This is the cartoon that the neurologist at the beginning of the article uses as an example. Take a look at that for just 1 second. After you've looked at it for a second, Just think to yourself, you don't say it out loud, like, what is it that you see? The article asserted that most of us can't just look at one thing in that picture. You start to look at one thing, but then your brain just starts, all of these parts of your brain start working together and making a whole narrative about it. You're thinking of different scenarios, you're putting it together, and you know, not very many of us would say, it's a kid stealing cookies out of a cookie jar, or the sink is overflowing. We would say things like, in fact, the responses in the article were like, what do you see there? The need for pharmaceuticals. What do you see there? Total chaos or a nightmare, right? It's because our brains can't help but try to figure it out. And that's what cartoons do, and that's what comedy do, is you're looking at something that doesn't seem quite right, and you start putting it all together and using all these different parts of your brain, and it provides this really great little speed workout. Here's another example that they used in that same article. Read that. Oh, that's pretty good, right? It's all right. It's from the New Yorker, so it's kind of dry, right? But what kind of humor is that using? It's incongruity, right? Why? What's incongruous about that? There's a bunny on the psychiatrist's couch, right? That's not right, right? Bunnies don't go to the psychiatrist. So it's very simple. That's it. That's like the whole joke, pretty much. The thing on the bottom is funny, too. But really, as soon as you see a bunny on a psychiatrist's couch and you see the Kleenex and all the other stuff makes sense, you get it, right? And figuring out how to get it is the workout. Then there's this one. That's good, huh? Yeah. Good. Perfect. You're so good, right? First everybody went, ha, 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 and then you went, oh, right? Because nobody wants to see Waldo wasted, right? That sucks. He's Waldo. And so it is the relief from the Waldo, the child's, the thing that my kids have these books, and it's very sad, right? But it's sad funny, right? And it's also incongruous. He should not be at a dive bar, right? So, okay, so you get it. Then there's this one. Okay, yeah, that one started with the groan and ended with a laugh. Now think about that, right? First you had to groan and then you kind of chuckled like, ow, right? And that's because it takes all those other elements and it adds meaning, it adds vulnerability. It adds, we could be those people, right? When you start talking about sex and sex role-playing games, people are like, oh, ow, that could just go bad, right? And then it went bad for them and you're like, oh, that's just terrible. So, but it's funny because we all know we could be there, right? We all know we could be there, and we've been in situations that are similar, and we can start making personal associations, and personal associations make things funnier because you're with the comedian, right? Good. So I'm going to actually now try to translate that a little bit to a real person. That's Charlie Chaplin, right? Everybody knows Charlie Chaplin. Look at the top left-hand corner. That's Charlie Chaplin in his little outfit that I just talked about. And he's funny looking. And since he's funny looking, we can laugh at him. He just doesn't look like a real person. He looks like a clown person, right? Well, there's nothing funnier than a clown except for, go to the right, a clown on a tightrope, right? Tightrope. So he's up on the tightrope. That means the clown's in danger. And that's when the circus goes crazy, right? Because the clown's in danger, but we don't really care if he dies, but we kind of do, but we don't know, and it's all weird. And so we laugh out of nervousness, and we laugh out of he's funny, right? Look down below. Nothing's funnier than a clown on a tightrope unless you put monkeys on his head. That's super funny, right? Because there's monkeys on his head, and that's incongruous and weird and more dangerous, and it just sort of keeps raising the stakes, right? So you go from this to this to this. Now, the only thing that you could do to make that scene funnier, besides being Charlie Chaplin, is that block down there at the bottom. That's what happened before this. You know why he was doing all of that? For love. For this girl, right? This is from a movie called The Circus, which is a great, great, great Charlie Chaplin short. And if he's doing it for love, it makes us get it. Even though he's a clown, even though he's distanced from us, we root for him on the tightrope. We want him to win. It's not like we want him to lose. So that superiority thing gets kind of complicated, right? You can be laughing at somebody out of superiority, but you can also be commiserating with them in a way. You can be attached to them. It's a very complicated thing. So talking about Charlie Chaplin and his super impressive body of comedic work that I believe changed the world brings me to this. Comedians are a strange and frightening subculture. As I was saying yesterday, comics are a peculiar bunch. I admire what they do because I know I could never do it. I admire them in the way that I admire astronauts and high altitude climbers. I think what those people do is insane, but I think it's awesome, and I'm really glad that they do it. What comics do is just bizarre to me when you think about it. But it's also a great gift. It's a gift to us that should not be underestimated. They provide a fundamentally essential service to humankind. And this service for me subdivides into 3 major categories of comic style, and I'm going to start with this one. Comedy as a science. I taught a course in comedy as science last term, and we kind of started with this, but then we sort of took this gigantic left turn, and that's how I came up with these other categories, is we realized that science was too, there was so much more to talk about. But when I talk about comedy as a science, I think of this guy, and this is Guy Raymond. This is exactly the guy I was talking about yesterday, the guy that told me to lift my right arm. I don't know what that's from, but that's him back in the day. Lifting my right arm was just a clever trick, and I don't think I'm ever going to really understand why that was funny or why that worked. I think that I get that it had something to do with timing and diverting the audience's focus, but in the end, it's still just like a crazy magic trick to me. There are all sorts of other tricks that comics use to get us to laugh, but it's surprising how many of them have something to do with the manipulation of time, and we talked about that when we saw The Way Things Go yesterday as well. The manipulation of time is a really, really, really precise tool. Anyway, some of the common terms that we talked about in that conversation about The Way Things Go were acceleration, deceleration, duration, escalation, anticipation. Those are all time words, right? And if you do that, if you choose one of those, or choose 3 of those, or manipulate those in different ways, and then you throw in an obstacle, then you raise the stakes, just like Charlie Chaplin in the other pictures. One of the truest things that I know in the world is that there is no reason to laugh unless something is at stake. That's totally true. When things aren't funny, it's because there's nothing at stake. So, check this out.
What are you doing up here? I thought you were downstairs.
This is Lucille Ball. This is from Vitamin to Vegemin, which is, if you haven't seen it, you're insane. I wanted to show that, but it's like 11 minutes, and I kept trying to cut it, and you can't cut it. Like, you have to see the whole thing. So Google that. It's pretty great. But the other one's not bad either, right? And it does give you an idea about time and escalation, and it leads right to that punchline, right? The punchline of that joke is speed it up a little, right? That's it. And then you're like, no way. And then it goes on. Cool. James Agee. Do you guys know who James Agee is? Let us all now praise famous men. I'm saying that wrong. He wrote an incredible, beautiful essay for Life magazine called Comedy's Greatest Era in 1949. And in it, he's sort of lamenting the end of the great silent movie clowns. And he wrote this. In the language of the comedian, 4 of the main grades of laughter are the titter, the yowl, the belly laugh, and the boffo. The titter is just a titter. The yowl is a runaway titter. Anybody who has ever had the pleasure knows all about the belly laugh, but the boffo is the laugh that kills. In an ideally good gag, perfectly constructed and played, it would bring the victim up this ladder of laughs by cruelly controlled degrees to the top rung, and then would proceed to wobble and shake, wave, and brandish the ladder until he groaned for mercy. Then, after the shortest possible time out for recuperation, he would feel the first wicked tingling of the comedian's whip once more and start up a new ladder. That sounds awful, right? But you know what he means, right? We love to laugh like that. And I don't really know why we love to laugh like that, but there are reasons. There's people who have studied why we love to laugh by that, but it kind of doesn't matter. We hanker for that. We hanker for that, like, oh my God, don't stop, stop. Oh my God, don't stop, stop. Laugh, right? He goes on to say that the silent film comics business was to be as funny as possible without the help or hindrance of words, and so he gave us a figure of speech, or rather a vision of his predicament. In other words, he gave us a poem, a kind of poem, moreover, that everybody understands. And that's it. Comedy is this thing that if you do it right, everybody can understand. Everybody should understand it. I'm not sure that means everybody will always boffo laugh at it, but common understanding is a pretty awesome goal. So I'm going to move on to another style of comedy. Comedy as a reflector. That is Harold Lloyd. If you don't know Harold Lloyd, write down his name. Really amazing. This just means comedy that can act as a sort of mirror, showing us ourselves for who we really are. These are truths that we probably know deep down. Maybe we know them, but we're trying to avoid, and we all have those truths. I have a very fancy pants Shakespeare quotation for this one. Who is it that can tell me who I am? That's from King Lear. The answer is clear. It is a comedian, right? Actually, in the context of this play, it's not a comedian. The answer to that is the fool. The fool tells King Lear who he is all throughout that play. And if you don't know it, go read it. Anyway, Lear said, does anybody know what the fool actually says to that? For some other reason? Lear says, who is it that can tell me who I am? And the fool says, Lear's shadow. And we all go, ow, right? That's kind of painful, but it's also great comedy, right? That's just the perfect thing to say, and it's small. So comedy sometimes functions as a mirror, sometimes a terribly unforgiving mirror, and Shakespeare's fools are, to me, perhaps the most amazing example of this. Lear's fool, to my mind, is the very best fool, but doesn't have to be your best fool. I like him the best. Shakespeare's fools don't just tell the truth in these plays, they are the truth. They actually function as the truth in the play. They function as the truth, often the only truth in a virtual sea of BS, because in Shakespeare's play, people are just fooling themselves a lot, right? The fool is allowed to say what nobody else can say, and he won't get his head chopped off for it most of the time. But for the fool, there's a different kind of danger. What if he can't fulfill his obligation? What if your job is to tell people the truth, to really make them see themselves clearly, and what if they won't look? What if they won't listen to you? Then what do you do, right? In Lear, does anybody know what happens to the fool? He might die, we don't know. He just disappears. He just splits, he's just gone. At the end of the Act 3, you just never see him again, which is kind of amazing, right? To just have a character that's a pretty major character just leave. The only other person in that play who's been consistently truthful with King Lear the entire time is Cordelia, and she dies. So the truth is dead in Lear. At the end of Lear, the truth is dead, and that's why it's a tragedy, right? That sucks. The truth has died or just left, right? So one other Shakespeare thing. You know who else doesn't have a fool? Who doesn't have a fool? Who needs a fool? Hamlet, right? Hamlet doesn't have a fool. The fool in that play has been dead for a while, right? You know the skull? The skull is the fool. He's been dead long enough for his head to turn into a skull. I said school, didn't I? Skull, that's what I meant. Anyway, he says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a man of infinite jest, bloody, you know that. He's been dead for some time when that play starts, and there's a pretty good argument to be made that if he'd been around, things might be better. At the top of one of the most incredible soliloquies in the entire English language, to me, Hamlet says this, I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. Well, along with all that mirth, with all that joy, with all of his laughter, he's lost the ability to make the most basic decisions. He's overwhelmed with conflict, but without the tools to help him effectively process that conflict and take action. And that's what the whole play is about, right? I'm just saying a decent fool would have probably helped him with that. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm going to show you another comedian now that I think falls pretty solidly into this reflector category. His name is Tim Minchin. You guys know Tim Minchin? Okay. All right. That's him too. Just check out that costume, right? When we talk about costumes, I mean, he looks like a court jester, doesn't he? Like he wears that costume and all of it. He never wears shoes, and he wears this really weird, like Elvis tuxedo, and his hair is like that, and he's wearing Alice Cooper eyeliner. It's his thing. Okay. Minchin gets some flack for some of that stuff, which I'm sure it's obvious, but I don't think he gets any real flack from his fan base, really. I mean, he seems to really know his audience, and his audience is me and like Helen Hess. Helen Hess turned me on to Tim Minchin. We love creationism jokes. We love dorky science humor, and even if we buy homeopathic medicine, we get how that doesn't make any logical sense, and we allow ourselves to be mocked for it, and we like it. So he's not really risking a ton, and he's really funny. So that's cool. But what about comedy that takes really big risks? What about comedy that's more than just a little bit irreverent? And that brings me to my next point. This is the next section. Okay? Comedy is an affront. That is Gilda Radner, one of my personal heroes. She, in that still, is doing a character called Candy Slice from the really, really early days of Saturday Night Live. And Candy Slice was sort of a Patti Smith parody, but it was also just a parody of like rock culture and fan culture at that time. She was just like a massive, massive, horrifically drug-addicted, but super talented rock star character. And she would be falling apart, stewing smack in the dressing room, and they would have to pick her up and haul her out and put her on the stage, and then she'd come to life and do an amazing show, and then she'd fall apart and they'd haul her off, which sounds, you guys are all like, oh my God. I know, but she was so funny, and she was able to do that and comment on what the culture was of the time, where not too long before she was doing this, lots of young rock stars, there's kind of a run of them like dying young, right? So there was that sort of like, what are we perpetuating and why is that absurd, right? That's my interpretation of her. Anyway, she's great. This whole category is where it gets really dicey. This is comedy that I think only works when an audience really trusts the intentions of the comic. Like, I trust Gilda Radner to not totally hurt me. But that trust can be really difficult to earn, especially in a live situation. I'm going to start with bad language, I guess. I'm going to move through a few categories. My mom is a poet, and she used to say to me and my brother that there is no bad language, only bad intentions, which is a very lovely thing to say to your kids. But what that did for my brother, who was very little, was it made him into a kid who was under 5 who swore like a sailor. He had the foulest mouth, and we were in Utah, and it was very conservative, and he got in a ton of trouble. So it was a great thing to say, but it was also a little unrealistic thing to say, because words have power, and people were offended, and so you got to take all that stuff into account. Today, we're probably really used to, you guys are probably very, very used to comedians using massive amounts of profanity on stage. It's actually a rare comedian who doesn't magnify their entire act with swear words. Jerry Seinfeld actually speaks pretty eloquently about why he doesn't use swear words. He's probably the only mainstream comedian that I can think of that doesn't swear a lot. He doesn't swear at all. He said that he tried it once, and he thought it was cheap for him, and so he decided not to. Actually, there's a great HBO special with 4 major comedians talking about that, and when he says that, they just all laugh at him. But anyway. Part of it is probably that those words have power, and using words outside polite vernacular might jar us out of complacency. People make that argument. Force us to listen, and that the irreverence of using bad words in a public setting can be shocking for our little 4th grade ears, and so that's that relief thing again, right? I think it used to be shocking, but I'm not really sure anymore that just swear words can shock us. It's just not, it just doesn't make sense to me anymore. But there are some words that still can shock us. And if you think, again, sort of like that really looking at yourself in the eye here, if you think that there are words that can't shock you, I bet there are. I mean, there might not be words that I show today, but I bet there are words that do, if you really thought about it carefully. Back in the 1970s, George Carlin had a tremendous routine called 7 Dirty Words. If you've never seen that, some of you guys, yeah, that's good. You should watch it, because it's actually great. And George Carlin is incredibly eloquent, an amazing, amazing comedian. He sort of methodically and poetically exposes the ridiculousness of our culture obsession over forbidden language. And that routine is probably Carlin's most famous routine. It did him right, that routine. But in the 60s, Lenny Bruce's career, do you guys know Lenny Bruce? Mm-hmm. His career was pretty much destroyed because of seemingly endless legal troubles over profane language. He was a really, really important figure in the history of performance, and certainly in the history of comedy. And it certainly wasn't his legal troubles that were the only reason that his career ended or that his life ended. But it had a big impact. And it had a big impact on, I think, the culture of comedy, his work and those events. For the most part, the thing that I find interesting is that the words that got Lenny Bruce in trouble were words that referred to sexual acts, almost across the board. I will not list them off here, but the kinds of language in the clip that I'm about to play, authorities didn't have much problem with. And I have problems with these words for a lot of reasons. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to play a fairly famous section from an act that I'm pretty sure, but I'm not positive, happened in 1962. So if you can, get your brains around 1962. I need to give a disclaimer here. It is a pretty tough piece to watch. It's comprised almost entirely of racial slurs. That's the entire point of the whole thing. But it's still brutal. I think it's still brutal. I think it's hard to watch. If you can, though, I'd like you to consider the kind of risk that Bruce is taking at this club at this point in history. And whether or not you agree with his thesis, ask yourself if you think it's funny. Not if you think it's cool, but if you think it's funny. And do you think it's useful? Or do you think it's more harm than good? Do you think that this is not a good idea on his behalf. Or there may be other things too, but think about it in that way. Another thing too is that there is actual live audio recording of Bruce delivering this act, but it was kind of poor quality, so I'm not going to have you listen to that. I'm actually going to show a clip from a movie that was made about Bruce's life starring Dustin Hoffman. So know that this clip is an interpretation of that act. It's pretty much verbatim the act, but it's a visual interpretation, and it's kind of highly dramatized. If you're interested in this, I would listen to the audio later as well, because the contrast is quite interesting. Anyway, let me see. I'm just going to play it. That's actually Lenny Bruce. Hey, everybody. Earlier I said that most comics are primarily interested in getting laughs. I don't really know about that. I think he's doing something else, right? He did get some laughs, and if you listen to the audio, it's really interesting to me. It's hard because you don't get the visual, but it's interesting to see where he gets the laughs. He doesn't get a laugh at all until he says kikes. Once he says that, because at first, well, there's just one word at first, and then he hits kikes, and people go, oh, and they start getting on board, and then it starts going a little bit, they start understanding the premise, but it's never comfortable laughter. It's never like, yeah, ha, ha, right? He's never going to get a boffo laugh on this, and he kind of doesn't care. I don't know what that makes him. I don't know if that makes him a comedian, or a commentator, or a little of both, or what, but it's an interesting thing to consider. I think there is a certain breed of comic that is more willing than others to forgo that boffo laugh, or even that belly laugh if they have something really important that they want you to hear. And I think Lenny Bruce was like that. But they're still going for the laugh. Most of them, I think, are still going for the laugh. And otherwise, it's just a lecture, right? I don't know. Anyway, how do you straddle that, I guess is my question. It's a small handful of comedians that I think work at that level of social satire with that level of intensity. But I think Dave Chappelle was one of them. That's Dave Chappelle in whiteface. Dave Chappelle, if you have never seen it, the Dave Chappelle Show was a huge hit. But do you know what happened to him? Does anybody know what happened to Dave Chappelle? He left. He split, like the fool in Lear. He was at the height of his career. He had a multi-bazillion-dollar television contract, and he went back to his farm in Ohio. He said it was because nobody was listening. I guess that's what he said. There are all sorts of other rumors, but in the interviews he said that nobody was listening to what he had to say, at least not in the way that he wanted to say it. I think he's back, actually, now doing stand-up, so I guess he's not quite like the fool in Lear, but you get the idea. This is Tig Notaro. You guys ever heard of Tig Notaro? Yeah? Tig Notaro did a great and amazing set a couple years ago at the Largo. This was actually near where I used to live in Los Angeles, and so I used to go to the Largo a lot, and I heard about this set. She did a set in LA where she opened up with the line, "Hi, I have cancer." She did. She had cancer. But all of her best comedy friends were in the audience that night, and none of them knew until she said that on stage in the mic. She'd just been diagnosed, and it was not hopeful news. It was bad news. But that night, she crafted what is now a legendary act of seriously great comedy. You can actually get the audio to this. There's a whole album of it. All about her recent life troubles, about her cancer and her mom dying and her girlfriend breaking up with her, all like incredibly horrible, horrible things. But it was awesome. It was awesome not because it was brave or because it made light of cancer. It didn't make light of cancer. And it was great because she was just really, really funny. It wasn't sentimental, and it wasn't filled with false bravery, and it wasn't peppered with self-congratulatory laughter from the audience because they were being so supportive. She didn't even allow for that. She stops a few times and think to redirect the audience response, to tell them to stop being so sappy. The work that night was great because she is an expert in her craft, and she came to stage with the tools that she had on her. And she said later that she just really didn't know what else to talk about. Talking about other things would have felt like a lie, she said. So I wonder, is a comic's first loyalty to the truth or to the laugh? Or is there somewhere in between? Of course, this also begs another question, I think, for me, which is, should comics only be able to joke about something that they personally own? I mean, she really had cancer. So can I only joke about cancer if I have it? Can I laugh about aspects of other races and cultures? I don't know. But can I laugh about the opposite sex? Can I laugh about other people's kids or just my own kids? What are the rules and who makes those rules? Those are really interesting because I think they translate to other rules that we make for each other. I grew up in the 1980s, just so you know. When I was about your age, this guy was president. Things were really bad. For me, I thought they were bad. There was a lot going on that I thought was bad. There was an insane economic policy. There was a horrifying nuclear arms race. And there was the birth of the AIDS epidemic. It just sucked. Everything sucked. We all knew it sucked. Everybody was in my circles, was really bummed out. Besides spending an inordinate amount of time depressed and overwhelmed and feeling like things would never get better, I saw some of the best social commentary comedy of my entire life during those years. It was necessary, brutal, gut-splitting comedy, and I don't believe it was merely to distract us from our troubles. I believe it helped us reckon with those troubles. There was definitely some complicated, interesting, biting satire in clubs and a tiny, tiny, tiny bit on TV. But honestly, with the people that I hung out with at parties and at bars and in class, it was mostly really tasteless, raunchy, horrible, gross, way over the top comedy. It was highly, highly inappropriate comedy. And it was about those topics that I just talked about. Now, it was also really, really funny. It just was, and you have to trust me on that, even though it sounds like it would not be. There was at the time, there were also outrageously cruel AIDS jokes everywhere, all over the place. You couldn't go a day without hearing them sometimes. And those, well, there's still jokes like that. But they're still not funny, right? They weren't funny then, and they're not funny now. But you know what else isn't funny? Careful, benign, placid jokes. Those jokes aren't funny either. It's because they don't matter. Like I said earlier, there's no reason to laugh unless something is at stake. And that is true from Buster Keaton to I Love Lucy to Stephen Colbert. That's Stephen Colbert. Right? Stephen Colbert is genius in this territory, right? And you guys obviously all know him. I'm not going to go on about him. I decided not to show him because I figured everyone's seen everything of his. So anyway, what he makes clear to me that the higher the stakes, all the more reason to push. If you have not, one thing, if you haven't seen Stephen Colbert at the White House press correspondents' dinner from a few years back when Bush was president, you should totally see that. Because that's where he's really risking, right? In the show, he's not risking. It's like Tim Minchin and knowing his audience, right? Everybody, for the most part, Stephen Colbert knows his audience. But at the White House correspondents' dinner, it's brutal. And he gives up the laughs on purpose. Anyway. This provides a challenge, I think. What do we do? I hope that it isn't true that by laughing at something, I inherently diminish its importance, because I laugh all the time at stuff. I hope that by laughing about something awful, that I'm not condoning that awful thing, because I laugh at awful things all the time. And I really hope that there aren't some things that we really can't ever laugh about, or that we need a license to laugh about. I want to be able to laugh at things, no matter what. It's taken me a really long time to really commit to this. I don't think I was actually really committed to it in my comedy class last term, but I'm committed to it now. I think that we should be able to laugh about anything, really anything. I think we should laugh at and around and through all of those things that we love and all those things that completely terrify us. I think it's our greatest weapon against ignorance and our greatest weapon against despair. Occasionally it involves risk, huge risk, but so does everything worthwhile, so whatever, right? In his latest comedy special, Louis C.K., you guys know Louis C.K., right? He spends a lot of time building up to the bit at the very end of the show. Did you see that last show? It's like for $5 you could get it on. Anyway. I'm not going to go on about Louis C.K. because I think everybody probably knows at least a little bit about him. But in case you haven't seen this bit, I'm going to heave out another disclaimer. It's entirely possible that this might totally offend people. It's not my intention to offend you. My intention is to expand the conversation. But please be aware that this material may tread into some rough areas for some people. And on top of that, it is totally riddled with profane language, because it's him. Anyway, the bit is known as "of course, but maybe" now, just because that's sort of the refrain. And I am of the mind that this is the bit that Louis C.K. has been building up to his entire career. I think it is absolutely, structurally, a comic masterpiece in the crafting and delivery of this piece. And that's whether or not you think it's funny or you think that the thesis is correct or anything. Like, just structurally, in terms of what I've talked about today, the piece is just airtight. In the crafting and the delivery of this piece, he utilizes every tool I've talked about so far, and probably more. See if you can spot them while you watch it. I'm going to play it now, okay? right. So there's a lot we could talk about that, I'm sure. That bit blows my mind. I was tentative to show it, not just because it was incredibly profane, but because I felt like when I saw it that the entire act built up to that, you know? And I thought, I can't separate it. But clearly it was all right. I mean, I don't know if you guys didn't see it before, it was all right. So that is actually interesting to me, that it actually works on its own, out of context, because I was a little worried that it doesn't, because he also carefully milks that crowd for a good hour before he gets to that. Yeah. Anyway, for me, the thing that I do want to talk about is about that time when he stops. When he stops and he says, hey, you were with me about dead kids and peanuts, right? When he says that, everybody starts going, oh, God, he just said slavery, oh, my God. He says, no, 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 no. You were with me, and you are in this with me now, so you can't go anywhere. That is hugely profound to me. He says, you cannot cherry pick. You can't cherry pick. I find that fascinating. I think about that all the time. I think, wow, I can't cherry pick? Because I kind of feel like I cherry pick a lot. But that for me is the whole point of the bit. It's the thing to the side. The bit's funny and it goes on and it has this escalation, it has all this great construction. But the important part of the bit is this aside he throws at the audience, and he pulls out that phone and he makes people look at it, right? And he says, look at yourself here. This is what you do. You have choices. You make choices all the time. And you know what that reminded me of? It reminded me of Robin Owens' project last year, Robin Owens' senior project. You guys didn't see it, but she made these beeswax casts of iPhones. It was an amazing project. And they looked and felt just like real iPhones, and you could pick them up. And when you picked them up, she had as the screen a mirror. And so you look, and it was awesome, right? Anyway, it made me think about myself when I saw that art, and this makes me think about myself in, for me, a really similar way. So I don't know. Comedy is about something more than just belly laughs, clearly. Maybe it's also about patience and generosity of spirit. Maybe it's about being willing to allow yourself to be uncomfortable for just a little bit longer than you think is reasonable, more than you think you should have to, just to see where that might take you, just out of curiosity. And this is where I'm going to do something. I'm going to haul out that great old Bill Drury quote, because I want to. Okay. You guys have seen this a bazillion times. I understand you've seen this a bazillion times. Just take one more look at it. It's a great quote. Read it. And then when you get to the final word, when you get to at the end where it says, you're about to, this discomfort and intellectual conflict is when learning is taking place. You can just take out learning and put in comedy, right? I think that's brilliant. You guys don't care. I think it's awesome. I have two more points, and that's it. And they're very brief. The first one is actually the thing I've been dying to say the entire time. It's this. I hope that after all of this time you understand what I mean by that, and that it's very, very complicated and very deep, but very meaningful. The other thing is this. That's John Coltrane. He is no comedian, I don't think, but he is a great, great man to me. I'll get to him in a second. I want you to leave here today and consider after you leave here what tools you might use to build what you want to build, to say what you want to say. And I want you to ask yourself what you could do with the tools that you happen to have on you right this very minute in your chairs right now. There is a story about John Coltrane, and I actually could not confirm this with Cooper. I tried. But I do believe that it happened. Actually, I know that it happened. I heard an audio of one instance where it happened at Temple University in 1966. He'd been playing for a really, really long time. This was towards the end of his life, so he was doing really insane, like experimental, crazy, crazy jazz stuff. And he'd been playing for a long time. The band was going nuts. And at a certain point, he just stopped. The band kept playing, but Coltrane just stopped, and he threw down his horn. And he started beating on his chest. And he was beating on his chest, and he was yelling really loud. And after a while, he stopped yelling, and he just started chanting. And then he stopped beating on his chest and chanting, and he started singing. And it wasn't really singing. It was like this weird, like, just these crazy sounds that were kind of melodic but kind of not. And it was just perfect for the music, and it was beautiful. But it was pretty weird. And the horn was, like, off somewhere on the stage. And everybody was super into it, but they were kind of freaked out. And the band was freaked out because the band was trying to keep playing, and he was just doing this weird thing. And after it was over, one of the band members asked him why he did that. And he said, I ran out of horn. Which is a funny joke, right, in a way? But it's also so huge, right? It's just huge. I ran out of horn. So he just had to do something else, which is incredibly moving to me. I guess that's to say that no matter what your primary tool ends up being, there might come a point, if you're lucky enough to get where John Coltrane got, right? If you're that lucky and you've practiced that hard and you've gotten to that level of work where you reach the limits of what your tools can do for you. And that's a hugely pivotal moment. And that's where you have a massive choice, right? You have to find another tool. You got to throw it away. You have to be willing to throw away that tool. And you have to find another tool. And those tools might be in you or on you. It might not be somewhere else. So look there first, right? That's it.